I love companies like, I've worked with AWS for years, with where Microsoft are going, Google. They're incredibly successful companies, but I don't want the whole world to be dominated by 5 or 6 companies. We want a mixed economy with competition and the kind of creative gale of destruction, if you like. So I'm wondering whether those huge players that are now very dominant will then have to coexist as this kind of next wave of technological change built on their platforms comes across, and we'll get kind of new champions and new entrants and all that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of excited about that.
We seem to be in a world where software is consuming everything and product is king. So success stories of growing services businesses seem to be quite few and far between. James Herbert is the founding partner, or one of the founding partners of Panopoly Group, a high-growth digital transformation services business. James talks about, or breaks down, the journey of taking them from concept to a 130 million revenue company within 3 years, and then listing on the AIM, the alternative investment market, and the experience of doing that, along with, on a broader level, the digital transformation journey of UK public sector. And he also talks about Satya Nadella of Microsoft, someone who he looks up to, and the amazing job he has done there. We also cover lifestyle businesses, government procurement, and much, much more. James is an incredible speaker and provides some amazing perspective. Please feel free to download this one and subscribe. We'd really appreciate your support. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I enjoyed speaking to James. It's James Herbert. James, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you?
Hi, Gareth. I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me as well. Looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we had a little bit of a chat in the lead up there, and we got lots of stuff in common and lots of things to potentially talk about. But before we do a deep dive here, James, I'd just like to ask you to give us a bit of an intro to yourself for people who don't know who you are.
Okay, no problem. Well, I'll start now and work back a little bit. So I'm founder and CEO of two businesses really. One called Foundry 4, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, but it's primarily a technology services business, and it's owned and part of a group called the Panopoly, which I was also a founding member of, which is a group of UK-based, primarily SMEs, focused on some aspect of either change, design, or technology around the kind of broad topic of digital transformation. So kind of two hats in that way. And where I came from was, I won't go back too far, where this journey I ended up in really came from was kind of being a frustrated civil servant and a frustrated local government officer. And, I like to think some of the best businesses are born out of frustration rather than some huge, great vision. But in a way, I did have a vision. So I worked at the Cabinet Office on the original government cloud programme, some of the stuff that then became the government digital service. And then I worked in local government, doing some interesting, innovative stuff around cloud and new modern technologies and approaches to data, etc. But the frustration was essentially, as a public servant, my view of the technology that was used in the 90s and noughties, the lack of any focus on users, on citizens, on their experience, the waste, the supply chain that kind of matched the same problems back into the sector. And very broadly, I felt that I could achieve more change with my knowledge about cloud and new ways of working, and latterly sort of agile and digital, etc., setting up my own companies and helping organizations with them rather than being within the organization itself. So that's the very broad background.
Brilliant. Well, so talk us through the sort of important milestones in your early career then, James.
Yeah, so I think a big one for me it's when I started to think about data and technology a little bit differently. I worked in, it's a long time ago now, but I worked in what was called the National Criminal Intelligence Service, which became the Serious and Organised Crime Agency, which is now the National Crime Agency. So it's been on a journey of bringing together different agencies. And back in the day, so this is sort of late 90s, early 2000s, as the idea of soccer was envisaged, we had some really interesting ideas about how we could use data and how we could change our thinking around harm that serious and organised criminals caused, and how we could use the data from interventions into that criminality to be more predictive, to disrupt those criminals' lives more, and essentially to have a more of an impact on society rather than just sitting in each kind of silo and rushing out and arresting people for whatever, but actually understanding what made them tick, what general data did we have on them, how could we kind of join all that up and make a real difference. And the thinking was way ahead of its time. It's way over 20 years ago now. Some really bright people involved across all the different security agencies and police. But one of the big problems was that the data and the technology within which that data sat was not retrievable, we weren't able to join it up. We weren't able to do the things with it that we wanted to do to build up that picture and cause those outcomes. So I think that's when I first started to kind of worry about that fact, because that was despite the fact that a fair bit of money was spent on those systems and those projects. And then I ended up going on to a thing. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember. It's called the National Identity Scheme, and it was around the ID card program. And I'm kind of you remember that one? I mean, I was a bit ambivalent about the sort of politics around identity, but I did recognise that as the world became more digital, some way of capturing and securely owning our identity was going to become an important thing. But that was kind of my next jarring experience, because when I arrived there, what I saw was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of consultants, management consultants from various big consultancies. The senior people on our side often were from those same consultancies, and they'd kind of made the crossover, theoretically at least. And I didn't like what I saw, because I had my taxpayer hat on and I looked at it and I couldn't believe the waste. And okay, fair enough. That program in the end was kind of canned because of a political decision when the election happened. So in the end, it wasn't managerial unsuccessful. It just didn't finish. But the waste and the lack of specialist knowledge and skills of the people that were taking all this money out of the public, which could have gone on much more important things if we weren't going to, if we were going to do it in that way, really shocked me. And I started to fall out with people there quite badly. And some of them were people who maybe it wasn't the best people to fall out with corporately. So I ended up at the Cabinet Office, and I was so lucky with timing, because there was a government CIO, a guy called John Suffolk there, who had this kind of vision for how we could upset that supply framework, how we could change procurement, how we could get more innovative platform players, public cloud, all that stuff. And some of this sounds unremarkable now, but again, it was 11 years ago. And that's kind of where the G Cloud came from. And I was really lucky enough to be involved in that G Cloud program, working with a really talented lady called Nikki Stewart, who's now at UK Cloud, who was at the Treasury at the time, and others, and also to prototype a thing which we called the App Store for Government, which was a very, very early forerunner, really, of what's now the digital services marketplace and all that kind of stuff. And so I was so lucky to be involved in that. I learned so much. I got to meet businesses like AWS, like Salesforce, like smaller SME, innovative ones as well, UK-based ones. And it just really opened my eyes, I guess, to how crazy how we were running things was going from a technology and a kind of program delivery perspective in government. And then from there, I went off to work in local government, where our lead member, so the politician who led on kind of technology and innovation, was a guy called Liam Maxwell. And some people will know Liam who are listening. He became, in the end, the government CTO. And Liam was a great kind of scrum master, really, at that council, because I had IT, customer services, revs and bends, etc. And we were allowed to be really innovative and really try new things, crime mapping, publishing all our spend over £50, stuff with open source, sort of deploying AWS in a bit of anger, all those kind of things. Again, doesn't sound that remarkable now, but 10 years ago they were really big things. And that was the moment when I thought, right, I want to go out and speak about this more broadly to a greater collection of people. And by that point, I'd also realised that often in institutions, no one's a prophet in their own land. So actually, you get listened to more sometimes when you're kind of from the outside coming in. And that's why I went off into the private sector.
There's loads and loads of things in there which I want to unpack, okay? And so I want to rewind a little bit there and go back to the bit which kind of kicked this journey off for you, okay? It sounded like that you, well, maybe not kicked it off, but this was something you had the bit between your teeth, as my nan used to say, in relation to, which is the consultancies ripping off government potentially, okay? So and there's been a lot of talk about this over the years, and we all know that the way consultancy works and things like that, and there's lots of really good consultants out there and lots of really good advisors, and who essentially save the public purse millions, as opposed to be responsible for any sort of wastage. But a lot of money has been taken out of government for not so productive causes over the years, hasn't it? Do you think that's improved in the last 10 years, or was it just the same as it's always been?
That is a really interesting question, actually. No, I only say that because no one's actually phrased it quite like that, to me anyway. Let me just say a couple of things because I want to be a little bit balanced here. So I would agree with you, first of all. When I said there were these rows and rows and rows of generic consultants, which frustrated me, some of them individually were brilliantly talented. If they'd been hardworking, talented, bright, all those things, and there's certainly a place for that. And I also, I want to be a bit balanced. I think it's about having a plurality of suppliers rather than probably just picking one type. So I am a little bit nuanced on it. But to answer your question, I think, yes, it has improved up to a point. So what's improved? I think you've got greater plurality of suppliers. So you have had people introduced into the supply chain who have a different experience and different knowledge and applying that to their clients. So that's been a good thing. I think another good thing related to that is that the digital economy is about, in my view anyway, is about specialism. So yes, it's about multidisciplinary teams. Yes, it's about bringing different skill sets together, but each of those people need to really be masters of their brief, not generic, which is what the kind of traditional 20th century sort of Sloan Business School management consultancy model was about. And it worked back then because you were kind of making widgets rather than sophisticated knowledge, products and services. So it's brought those sort of more specialists in. And even when those more digital projects with those suppliers have gone wrong, the cost involved is much, much smaller than the cost used to be on some huge 10-year outsourced deal. And then finally, I think I still would say, as a UK citizen, I'm still very proud. I didn't personally have anything to do with it, but I'm proud as a citizen of gov.uk and of that platform and how groundbreaking that was and how much that's been copied by governments around the world. That would never, ever, 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 ever have happened in the old world, in the pre-GDS world with those pre-GDS suppliers. Gov.uk, we know it wouldn't have happened because they were on it with big suppliers for years, whatever it was called. And that it was really a marked change. So yes, there's been improvements. On the other side, though, there's been a lot of digital body shopping. So instead of having a 10-year contract, which, yes, we should move away from those, but actually if you just kind of replace that with tens and hundreds of contractors that aren't managed properly, don't have specific outcomes, don't have clear roles really within the client organization, I don't necessarily think that's a great outcome for public services either. And I also think SMEs, us, I'm one of them, we need to look at ourselves and make sure that, yes, we bring our passion and our purpose and often a bit of our ideology about a particular topic. We need to understand our clients' constraints in government and the challenges, and that you can't just kind of magic these problems away. Dealing with legacy technologies are really difficult long-term projects to get off a mainframe or something like that. So, I think there have been successes, but the job is not done. And that's a big question mark for me. So where does GDS go? What is the future of digital government? Have we risked with GDS? I've always been a big supporter, but are we risking it just becoming another government department that kind of never ends, but its brief isn't that clear? I don't know. I'm not saying that's fair. I know there's new leadership in there now, but these are questions that need to be answered. And fundamentally, we've got to get off. People accuse me of being too technologically focused. All the business things you want to do, all the user experience, all the decisions that should be made based on data, all of that stuff, we can't do it whilst we're still using 20, 30, 40-year-old technology. And that has to be grappled with and solved, at some point.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the digital transformation journey of government because I want to ask you specifically about that. But let's just stay on this consultancy theme for the time being, because the reason I asked that question, James, is because, if government is building a big stadium for the Olympics or something, you know what I mean? If the public purse is paying for that and then it fails and falls down, then it's all over the news and it's in everyone's face, isn't it? Everyone sees it. 40 million, 400 million quid has gone down the pan because of incompetence and whatever. Okay, but in an IT project, those kind of numbers we're talking about often, and nobody sees that. Nobody sees that. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really it escapes the gaze of cynicism and scrutiny, doesn't it? A lot of the time. So I am. You talked about the forerunner to digital marketplace. So, do you think the digital marketplace is on the right lines now, and it's making it a fair contest for SMEs and things like that? How far down the line are we with that right now?
It's a very Again, I think about this a lot, and this is probably a terrible answer for a guest on a podcast, but I don't really know what the answer is. I think it's achieved a lot. It's opened up the marketplace. I have done some work in other countries, and actually still in certainly European countries, accessing government work is really, really difficult compared to here. You haven't got a chance really, unless you're one of their kind of national champion type suppliers or partners. So most of them are quite a long way behind how far we've got in terms of, again, that plurality of supply. And also the fact that government has tried to be quite thoughtful about the costs it imposes on suppliers in their bidding process and in the procurement. So the UK government seems to me, in general terms, I don't mean this as a political point, just generally for the last decade or so, has been quite thoughtful about balancing the need for fairness and accountability in public procurement, which is absolutely right and appropriate, with the need for the client to get the right supplier and for the procurement process not to add too much inefficiency into the UK economy as a whole. So I think all these things have to be balanced, whereas I find the kind of EU mentality towards public procurement, if it's implemented literally, is only about preventing corruption. It's not balancing all the things that are needed with it, and of course that one is crucial. But having said all that, the one I struggle with a bit is probably the DOS, which is the Digital Outcomes and Services Framework, because at the moment, and I don't know whether it's pandemic related, but you're seeing 60, 70, 80 suppliers going for most opportunities. And to me, that is introducing a huge drag on UK economy, PLC. It's not productive. And it's impossible, the way it works, it's impossible to really convey, at least until the second round, why you might be worth picking for that particular piece of work. So it's sort of achieving the goal of everyone being able to apply, I guess, but it's not achieving any of the other goals of efficient procurement. That for me is something that needs to be looked at. I like G Cloud. Of course, I would be biased, and I would say that. I totally support the idea that G Cloud shouldn't be there for just, again, hiring individual bodies, as it were, through. I understand that, but I don't really see any problem with teams of people delivering outcomes against particular technology sets. I don't see why it shouldn't be used for that. And what G Cloud does allow is for the client to build up some intelligent understanding with a short list of suppliers prior to them making their decision. That seems to me to be quite a logical thing.
No, I completely agree. Our experience of DOS has been not very good because we're obviously in a similar line of work. So let me just put my conspiracy theory hat on then, okay? Because I love a conspiracy. I don't think we went to the moon, but no, I'm joking. But I think, but basically, what I've heard from a couple of people, I don't necessarily believe this at all. But as you know, James, okay, probably about 10 years ago, between 15 and 10 years ago, there was a period of disaggregation. There was a couple of suppliers who did everything for government, and then lots and lots of SMEs got into this space. And that's continued over the last couple of years. And the conspiracy piece is that IR35 is coming in to stop this from happening, and the big boys are going to cease back control, okay? Because they can afford to have a big bench full of permanent resources, and obviously small companies like us have got an associate model. That's our entire model. So do you think IR35 is going to benefit SMEs who are, true solutions, statement of work, outcome-based businesses, or do you think it's going to hinder SMEs in the medium to long term?
So my short answer to that, which may not be popular in my community, is yes. I'm actually quite pro it. You can hear the hesitation in my voice because I know it's a controversial topic, and I'm not necessarily pro the execution of it so far, but the concept. So I do believe in some conspiracy theories. I probably happen to not believe the one you've just said. I believe it's there because those of us like you and I that have been in and around government for quite some time know that there have been people sat in certain departments for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, picking up X £100 a day on the same piece of work that an employee could do, obviously not taking on risk, not employing people, not doing any of the things that a business, inverted commas, a true business has to do in order to get its favourable rate of corporation tax, if you like, versus income tax. So I know it's a difficult topic, but I don't think it's unreasonable to have some criteria around and enforce some criteria around where you are treated more towards being a company and when you're treated more towards being an employee. I do understand there are arguments around job security, having to sort of sort your own, your next gig out, all those kinds of things. And that's pressure, definitely. So don't get me wrong, contractors are such a huge part of our model, and we love them and we work together. And so I'm absolutely very pro the model and pro them, but there needs to be some kind of, I kind of have two hats on it, because at one level, they're great because they're such a huge part of our model and we really cherish them. On the other hand, when I set the business up, I had to take a lot of risk. I had to sign certain guarantees and, make certain sacrifices and things in order to take that risk. So if you like, as an entrepreneur, you just want each category to pay the bit, that it get the benefit that it should, proportionate perhaps to the risk it's taken or the jobs it's created and those kinds of things. Having said that, I think it's a really good thing for SMEs and a really good thing for the right side of contractors. And I'm bound to say our sort of contractors. The contractors that work in our teams and our own permanent people want to solve problems, and they want the client to put a bit of pressure and a bit of risk onto them to solve that problem. They don't really want to just be individuals sat mixed up in amongst client teams. They're of course generous with their knowledge and transfer of that knowledge, and that's part of our values. We talk about being generous with knowledge and experience, so it's absolutely not about not transferring capability or making people dependent on you. But what they love is being given a problem or an opportunity on behalf of a client and being able to deliver against it, whether that's delivery management, product management, software engineering, cloud migration, automation, doesn't matter, any of those things. And they love working to outcomes. It does require the client to be reasonable, and it requires us to be reasonable as well, because doing outcomes in a more agile setting can be quite tricky, but it can be done. We've definitely done it. So I'm sort of quite excited about it, because I think it might improve the quality of the work for people. And if we work on highly sophisticated technology projects for a set period of time where we and the contractors are together on the hook for delivering those outcomes within reason, they won't be inside IR35 anyway. So I don't really see it being a huge challenge. They may be famous last words though, Gareth.
No, I completely agree. I do think it is going to be a positive thing for SMEs in the medium term. Maybe not initially, but in the medium term for sure.
A bit tricky at first, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky at first. But I think a term I latched onto earlier on when you said was digital body shopping. That was quite a funny term. But I think... I think what it will do, we will get away from that. And there's nothing wrong with body shopping. There's a time and a place for it. But we just need to separate it out and be very, very distinct. I think that the digital marketplace, or certainly DOS calls it, there's outcomes and specialists, isn't it? That's the way they've split it.
I mean, I should just add to clarify, sorry, because when I did use that term, digital body shopping, that wasn't meant actually pejoratively to the bodies or to the people supplying those bodies. I probably meant it was actually aimed a bit more at the clients, to say if you're just doing sort of staff augmentation because you lack some skills and have gaps, that's absolutely fine. if you need to deliver particular outcomes at pace for a certain reason, then you may need to put a bit more effort into how that's packaged up and how you use your own employees and your supply chain to deliver those things for you. So it wasn't, sorry, I didn't mean that as a general critical comment. It was just about about which context, which approach is used in is probably more what I meant.
So let's go on to government then very quickly, and then I want to talk about what you're doing right now. But in terms of the government digital transformation journey, and you've worked in local government, which is generally seen as being a little bit behind central government in terms of the digital transformation journey, at least. How far down the line is the British public sector in terms of its digital transformation journey? We know GDS has done a really good job with certain things. How much further is there to go?
So I'm going to misquote now, Tom Loosemore quote. I've used a lot in the past. I'm getting old. I can't remember it, but it avoids you having to use the slightly more cliche terms like digital transformation or words that might imply that it's just about tech or it's just about users or it's just about design. It was a really nice expression. If I use Tom's definition, which is broadly that.
Tom Loosemore is one of the founders of GDS, isn't he?
That's correct, yes. I would say we're about 10% of the way there. That's my view. And 10% might sound a bit low, but I think for all the good work that has been done, how much fundamentally has really changed. So, how much have big legacy technology been replaced? How much has the working culture been replaced? How much has entire processes been got rid of that perhaps are not needed anymore? How much of good, timely data informing decisions? There's been a lot of progress. Like 10% is a lot when you're talking about a massive thing. But I don't think we should kid. I think it's almost important now. We've had lots of bunting and cake, as the joke goes, but actually it's important now to be a bit honest with ourselves about where we stand. I'm certainly not an expert on every other country and where they are with things. My guess and my sense from afar is that they have caught up increasingly with where GDS have got us to, but I'm not aware of maybe them going further. So I feel like everyone else is either at 10% or somewhere between 3 and 10%. That's my feeling. Just coming back to your point on local government, I mean, it's an interesting one that as to whether central government is further ahead, has been further ahead in digital transformation. I think in sort of the obvious aspects of digital transformation as represented by GDS, they probably are a bit behind. However, because they tend to be much closer to customers, because they do have to use data around services and have done always, and because they have to do and mend a bit more, their budgets are not the same as often as central government. There are definitely pockets of thinking and practice that I would argue are possibly where the transformation actually goes a bit deeper, but it may just not be quite as flashy and modern on the surface. So I'm not arguing with that point. I'm just saying it's an interesting, quite nuanced.
Do you think that's because their hand has been forced by the smaller budget thing? They need to be creative. They need to think outside of the box. They need to go into more of a deeper way of creative, deeper way of thinking about being more productive and covering more ground through the use of through the smart use of technology.
Yeah, I did. So I did think that. So the council I was in was already quite lean. It was cutting itself more when austerity came in, and for a period, that almost put anything on the table, and that meant you could be quite innovative and question things that maybe wouldn't have been questioned before. My frustration with local government now and the leadership of local government in general, I don't know whether that's political or officer, I'm not quite sure, or maybe it's central government and how it treats it, I don't really know, but I think it's missed the opportunity, and what it's done now is it's been salami sliced to a level that makes it very difficult for it to do this big change. Digital transformation, let's call it, is a long-term, continual, sort of almost permanent, it's a product mindset rather than a project mindset. It will go on forever, and you need money to do it. And so I think a lot of them have been salami sliced to a degree where it's going to be difficult now. But there are definitely pockets, and what is undeniable is that compared to most government departments, particularly the policy ones, they are much closer to their customers than central government.
Thank you for tuning in. I just want to take this opportunity to thank some of our friends. Firstly, all-round tech PR superstars Nelson Bostock. Whether you're an established technology brand or a fast-growing fintech, you need the right team behind you, a team that understands your brand, your purpose, your goals, and can really help you define your narrative and tell your story, the story that matters. These guys tick all of those boxes and more. You can find them at nelsonbostock.com. That's Nelson Bostock, with the CK on the end, .com. Highly recommended. I also want to thank Tramshed Tech. We've come down here and they've kindly allowed us to use their world-class recording studio facility down here. But they do office space, they do events. I can't recommend them enough. That's Tramshed Tech. And also a big shout out to Be Digital, who make all this possible. Be Digital enable organizations to become lean, agile, and to attract the right talent. That's bedigitaluk.com. Tell us about what you're doing right now, the purpose of the organization you co-founded, the journey so far, and what problem you're trying to solve and how it's going.
Sure. So it relates back a bit to the point where we had that discussion about consultancies and that kind of model from the past around technology and change. So I was lucky enough about 5 years ago now, to meet a guy called Neil Gandhi, who's kind of quite a prominent sort of UK, I suppose, technology entrepreneur. And he had this vision vision. He had a frustration as well, actually, going back to my frustration. So the frustration with the fact that digital transformation had not advanced as much as it should have done, both in public and private sector, and that our institutions that are really important to us were relying on advice of perhaps large consultancies and systems integrators who maybe weren't particularly digitally transformed themselves at one end, and then at the other extreme, lots of SMEs who were absolutely great in their domain, but maybe didn't have that big a view, were slightly narrow in terms of their kind of solutions towards things. And tied in with that on the SME side, particularly more so in the private sector, actually, where you haven't had a political agenda, still nervous about using smaller companies, nervous about their size, their financial provenance, all that kind of stuff. So the idea we discussed was, could we create a group of companies, of SMEs, each of whom covered some aspect of the digital kind of transformation life cycle, and retain as much differentiation and specialism as we could to sort of maintain what keeps them special, but over time come together and provide that scaled sort of one-stop, if you like, solution for clients. And this was an idea that became the Panopoly, and the word panoply literally means a collection of precious things. And the idea also was not that the Panopoly would just be a group of companies who enjoyed working together and had a kind of loose, teaming arrangement or an MOU or something like that, but who actually exchanged ownership in their companies for ownership in the Panopoly, so that together each founder and founding team had a shared sort of incentive to make this business work and succeed. And the idea behind that was that we would list on the London stock market as well, so that for a number of reasons, it was partly around raising investment so you can invest in new technologies and new practices and stuff like that. But it was also actually about working in the open and kind of having that, being forced into that sort of transparency about how you're doing, what you're doing, and sort of keeping us on track in that way. So I had just started a business called Not Binary at the time, and Not Binary was primarily a sort of product management, software engineering and cloud-based business, technology services, not only working in government, probably about 60% government, 40% other sectors. And I really felt like I had some great talent in the business, really good people, but that also we didn't want to spend 20 years, to grow from 10 people to 20 and 20 to 30. We wanted to scale. The thing about me, a business, what I'm interested in is scaling. Startup, I enjoy it. It's fun. And actually it's a very intense time, which is fairly unfindable in other environments. So I do hold my startup bits quite precious, but actually the challenge is scaling, and it's the challenge that this country, I think, is not always very good at versus, let's say, the US. So I'm always thinking, how do I scale? What's the business model? And for me, having other founders, being listed, raising some funds, etc., was going to kind of scale us forward and catapult us. And so I joined in with Neil and Ollie Rigby, who's the CFO, and we were one of the first businesses to sign up. We were one of the first. We were acquired in December 2018, along with 3 other companies. We listed on on AIM market the next day. And actually, quite amazingly, it was 4 years ago we had the conversation. It was 2 years ago that the Panopoly sort of was launched in anger when we listed, and we're now a £140 million market cap business. So we've created it's not quite a unicorn, is it? Because a unicorn's a billion. I don't know what the 100 million equivalent of unicorn is, but I do know there are not that many of them, and there aren't that many that do it in a couple of years. So that's something we're really proud of, not only because of the work that we do with our clients, but actually just proud to have created a new player on the UK kind of technology services scene, which I think was needed. Part of that journey, so we did the Panopoly, we did Not Binary as part of that. We grew, we acquired a number of other businesses, some of which you may have heard of, FutureGov, Different. We just this week announced the acquisition of a great company called Kits, Keep IT Simple, it stands for, which is a really successful, high quality live services and technology business. And I now run an organization that's still part of the group called Foundry 4. And Foundry 4 was bringing together the kind of core technology delivery elements that were sat in the group. So although we want to keep the bits that are differentiated and special, we also understand that, you know, we can't have 14 different brands and different organizations within one entity. So we're kind of gradually and gently, and hopefully in a modern way, bringing together components where it makes sense. And Foundry 4 is that sort of hero brand and organization across software engineering, across the kind of hardcore end of product management, delivery management, cloud. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, but we work on AWS, Google Cloud Platform 2. We do a lot of intelligent automation, which is something we launched a couple of years ago with a business called Human Plus. And also, obviously now, this live services bit that's coming into the group as well. So yeah, I'm running all of that, and got great team. There's about, it depends how you cut it, but there's about four and a half, I think 450 sort of people across the group. And then Foundry 4 has about, again, it depends how you include it, about 50 to 60 people, and at any one time, about 60 or 70 close associates working with us, as we described earlier, on an outcomes basis. Plus, we have a company in Bulgaria, in Sofia, where we build teams for clients, software engineering teams for clients, but we also have our own teams, our own technologists based there too. So that's kind of brings me up to the present day.
It's incredible what you've achieved in such a short space of time. I'm keen to learn a little bit more about the AIM going public, or what is it? Would that be called an IPO? I suppose if you go.
It was an IPO. That's right.
Yeah, of course. Was that in the business plan from day one? And
yes.
Oh, it was. Okay. So what did you do to prepare the business for that day? That must have been quite an intense period.
It's quite, to be such a young, small company. Not Binary was only about, I can't remember. It was 18 months or 2 years. I can't quite remember when we were acquired and did part of the IPO. So we had to go through the due diligence for the acquisition, and all of that had to be aimed towards the fact that we were going to be part of an IPO, which is a lot to ask people who have only just set a business up a couple of years before. So it was hard work. The group, Neil and Ollie and others involved, were incredibly, supportive and helpful. And I had my co-founder Sasha Rook handled a lot of the kind of chief operating officer, if you like, side of life with all of that, and he can do the work of about 15 people. So that really made a huge difference. But it was challenging. However, what it did was, it was a positive, really, because it made you address all those things that as a small company you would normally deprioritize or leave until some point in the future when you felt you were much, much bigger. So, our accounts had to be done to international reporting standards, at some level of those, which is not something a 2-year-old business would normally have to do. And it was hard work for the finance team, but actually it kind of gets you in good shape. And then once you're listed, and I had worked in a listed company before, but I'd never been anywhere near the top, as it were. So I didn't feel like it really affected me when I was much younger. This time round, it's really interesting because I think I'm a fan, really, because it drives you, right? It keeps you kind of honest. So you're going to do a forecast, and the forecast needs to be a good forecast, a solid, not a silly, overly positive, if you like, naively positive, but also obviously not negative either. And you do that forecast, and you need to make that forecast, within reason. And that generates all sorts of kind of decisions about where normally you may have wasted some money, or, normally where you might have been a bit more speculative and gone off down a kind of wild goose chase, or, all those things. And it kind of makes you grow up really quickly as a company. It does put pressure on you. Like it's definitely not for the faint-hearted, I would say. It's, you need to be quite resilient and quite robust. But actually, I think in the end, in our case, it's kind of created better businesses and installed a certain discipline into us, which I think is really helpful. And I think as part of our agenda around saying we're like SMEs, but actually we are like SMEs in our mindset. But when you consider the amount of due diligence and reporting we have to go through, we are pretty robust organizations.
So if I was to basically parachute you back into mid 2017 and you had to go through all of this again, okay, what would you do differently?
Oh, that is such a good question. You've got me stumped. What would I do differently? You know what it's like, because you're running a business. When you run a business, you have such little time for self-reflection, don't you? That I actually sometimes find these podcasts my best moment for actually thinking about things a bit.
Yeah.
What would I do differently?
Don't list on the AIM.
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I don't. No, I don't regret doing it at all. Genuinely, don't regret it.
I'm joking.
I'm so much more knowledgeable. I said it on another podcast. I think it's a really general statement, but I feel like as a result of the experience, I'm a much better business person than I ever would have been if I just carried on my own.
Just very quickly, James, while you're chewing on that, okay, I just wanted to bolt something onto it, because in this day and age, it seems to be very on trend to have a product-based business, okay? It's all about products these days, and, in terms of software and stuff like that, building software and stuff like that. But obviously you've gone through the journey of setting up a predominantly services-based business. So what I'm keen to extract from you as someone who's done this very successfully is, if there's anyone listening who is potentially thinking about setting up a consultancy-based business in the future, what can you, what advice could you give them? From your, what battle scars have you got? What can you say to them, which would potentially be of value?
Yeah, I've got quite a few of those. Quite a few battle scars for sure. One is it's different from setting up a product company, because to some degree, as a product company, you may just have a great idea, and if enough people, if you can get enough investment and there's enough customer traction for that idea, that might become an amazing product. So whereas in services, really, I think you need some kind of currency in your topic. You need to have built up a career in a particular topic and specialism, and you need to be thinking, why would clients pick up the phone to me? What is it about me that means they want me to come in and solve this service problem for them? Because you'll probably have to start off just you and maybe a couple of close people to you, and so initially you'll be doing a lot of the work and you'll be doing a lot of the consulting or a lot of the delivery. And so thinking very carefully about why you're different and what would make you more attractive than the many competitors that they'll no doubt be in your area. The second one is to think about channels. I think people think about sales a lot, but they don't think about channels to market. So partnerships, membership bodies, of course you have to do sales, of course, and that's partly about your network and your relationships, but also there are lots of other channels, and I don't think people always think about them enough. And I also finally think about your business model. So I think this is a bit what you're driving at, is a lot of people don't really want to do services businesses versus product, because they think of it as a kind of constant effort and grind of having to find people, find client requirements, find people, and you're in this kind of constant churn, and you can only ever see 3 to 6 months ahead, and all that kind of stuff. But actually it's a bit more subtle than that. So in what we do in technology services, it's primarily people with their expertise helping our clients. That's true. But because we do automation, because we do cloud, we build things during that process. We create IP. We create things that clients want us to look after for maybe 3, 4, 5 years. So you're, you're in a sort of productization environment rather than either services or product. So I think just thinking really carefully about your business model and where those opportunities for longer term revenue are as early as you can. It's really important. And then finally, in terms of business model, when it comes back to what you were asking me before about the Panopoly, why did I do the Panopoly? Well, one of the reasons is I've done one of these companies before, and I know when you get to a certain size, it is so hard to break beyond a certain revenue point, to break beyond a certain headcount point. People hit these walls, and they just it's a bit like a bottle that's stuck by a waterfall that's just going round and round, and the number of companies that can jump that wall is actually really, really small. And I thought, well, if I've got other founders around me, I've got other people selling, I've potentially got a bit of investment from a group, I've got a sort of clarity of purpose. I've got potentially routes into other geographies because we have a business in Norway as well, and that's part of the general plan in the future too. I'm just giving myself the greatest opportunity really in order to grow and scale my business. Now, what does that involve? That means you have to give up a little bit of autonomy. That means you have to be prepared to collaborate with peers, to compromise. If the only thing that matters to you is being master of your own domain, and you'd rather be master of something very small than sort of a key player in something quite large over time, then you're probably better off sticking in the former, in the former camp. But moving from sort of lifestyle to small to scaled is really, really hard in services. So I just would counsel people to be realistic about what it is they want and therefore which path they take. In terms of what I've learned, I'd say a couple of things. The group is really, really good. It's called ESG now, isn't it? But they're very, very hot on purpose, on why we're doing what we're doing. And they're very hot on the impact that we make on society. And an element of that, of course, is about diversity and inclusion. And I think when you're starting up a business, you're so busy rushing around trying to pick up work, deliver the work, and you call on people that are close to you. You call on people that you've known for years, and therefore, you can trust, whether that's other, people you employ or contractors or whatever. And of course, unconsciously over your career, you've probably built up quite a network of people who are quite like you. And the risk is, in my case, middle-aged white male, I end up with a business full of not quite middle-aged, but white men, as it were. And so I think I've learned, and the group's helped me with this, but I didn't have that. We didn't have all that in place when I started, that you need to try and instantiate that right from the start. And obviously you can't have very sophisticated HR processes and stuff when you're starting out. But if you can try and kind of build it in from the beginning, I think you can end up with a more diverse workforce, which is A, obviously the right thing to do, and B, actually more effective because you're reflecting back your customer base and their user base and stuff like that. So I think that's a learning. And on top of that, with technology, because it is so male dominated generally in terms of the kind of pure technology roles, it's just how much effort you need to be very proactive and put a lot of effort into trying to help kind of contribute to solving that problem. So they're two big things I would learn. The other thing I've learned, I don't mean it's lessons learned, I just mean I found it fascinating learning, is just how the markets work, how institutional investors work, what happens when you want to float a business, all the terms and concepts, how the share dealing work, all that stuff. I've just found it absolutely fascinating, and I've just learned so much from it that I wouldn't have done if I just kind of stayed on my own. And I think if I ever did another business that was ever bought or acquired or something like that, I'd have so much more knowledge now about sort of how to do it and what to look out for. I feel really well equipped in that regard.
A lot of what you said resonated with me, and a lot of it was brilliant advice, which I will probably remember for sure. So thank you for that. So let's turn our gaze to the future, okay? So I wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on a couple of things. It's a very strange time. We've had a really unbelievable 12 months. So what did you personally and your organization learn from the pandemic period that you are going to take forward?
I mean, in a way, we've been very fortunate, because what we learned was that our our focus on what we believed was really important to our clients, which is modernizing their technology, being able to do stuff with data, and hopefully all their technology being led by business and user needs, the space that we were in, and the fact that over time, as a collective group of people, we're quite genuinely passionate about the importance of doing that well in the public sector for all of our lives, placed us commercially very well, so that when the pandemic hit, where what were our specialisms? They were the public sector, particularly central government and health, and they were modern cloud-based technologies and ways of working. So to some degree, you couldn't be better placed and able to help and support a key sector. So commercially, to say we've had a good COVID almost sounds like the inappropriate expression, but I don't mean it like that. I wish the whole thing hadn't happened, but we've come through it well from a kind of performance perspective. And that drives home to me without sounding too pompous, hopefully, the importance of the work that we do and why we were right to focus on that work. We also learned that we had something quite valuable because we were kind of digital native or cloud first or whatever you want to call it, that we've always worked in a distributed manner. We've always used lots of tooling and collaboration things to get our work done and kind of swarm around problems, etc. And that we were on the right path because that's the way the world's gone. The third thing we learned, the positive, but I'm going to come on to a negative in a second. I think the third thing we learned was how when our clients, when focused and when pushed and when faced with a very clear and obvious kind of emergency, could move very fast and get stuff done in a matter of weeks that might have taken months before. And that was a huge positive. I think my reflections on the less positive and where we should focus in the future is that it slightly disturbs me that you're hearing a lot of people saying COVID has sped up digital transformation by X years, when what they're actually referring to is Zoom calls, essentially, and the ability of people to sometimes access a few more applications and stuff remotely and work at home. And it worries me that that's seen as a kind of barometer of digital transformation because it's so far off. I mean, it's table stakes, really. It's 2021. That stuff should have been happening anyway, should have at least been being thought about. What the pandemic has exposed, in my view, is if you haven't been modernizing, thinking deeply about design, technology and services, etc., for the last 5 to 10 years, you were going to struggle when this hit. And I think we've seen that. I think we've seen businesses struggle to shift. We've seen public services struggle to use data that it needs to. In some ways, the public services have done pretty well, good job, but they've had so much money thrown at them and almost all blockers taken out the way. And at some point, we have to come back to this point, and I come at it from a technology angle, but I completely acknowledge there are other angles as well, is that until we move off or substantially modernize most of the applications, databases, ways of working and approaches that most of our institutions use, going back to the Tom Loosemore quote, full adoption of that kind of model is limited and is constrained. And hopefully the pandemic will wake people up to start to get to grips with the less glamorous but much more difficult aspect of digital transformation, which may be getting off a 40-year-old mainframe. It may be getting the data out of all your Access databases and spreadsheets. It may just be using a bit of robotic process automation to improve a service experience for a user. But it's the difficult, sleeves rolled up, perspiration rather than inspiration, and then we can get on to the really interesting stuff with machine learning and artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and all that's good stuff.
So what are you excited about in the world right now in terms of technology innovation? And I'll just leave the question at that. It's a very generic question. What excites you or worries you, by the way?
Yeah. Well, what excites me in a way is, again, back probably related to the pandemic and possibly in our country related to Brexit as well, because whatever people's thoughts on Brexit are, either way, we're certainly going to have to kind of pull our finger out in order to make it a success. So for both reasons, what kind of excites me is the burning platform that they've created so that things can perhaps never be the same again, and that it will accelerate this shift. And we in Foundry 4, we talk a lot about fixing the plumbing. So fixing the plumbing is, in terms of modernizing technology and data and all that stuff, may not sound that exciting in and of itself, but what it enables you to do is all the really interesting stuff about, as I mentioned, around machine learning, around Internet of Things, around digital twins, around all that stuff. Because all this stuff is happening around edge computing. It's all happening, but it's happening on new stuff, and the new stuff lacks all the legacy data and information. And what we need for the real power is all that stuff to actually join up and for things to be able to communicate and talk to each other. And I think particularly what would excite me beyond that, therefore, what's the outcome? Well, in public services, the efficiency, the responsiveness and the quality of services, and the fact that decisions might be based more on data rather than kind of instinct and general experience, that's really exciting. And on the other hand, I love companies like, I've worked with AWS for years, with where Microsoft are going, Google. They're incredibly successful companies, but I don't want the whole world to be dominated by 5 or 6 companies. We want a mixed economy with competition and the kind of creative gale of destruction, if you like. So I'm wondering whether those huge players that are now very dominant will then have to coexist as this kind of next wave of technological change built on their platforms comes across, and we'll get kind of new champions and new entrants and all that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of excited about that. And finally, I am excited and pleased by businesses' greater focus on its impact on the world, particularly environmental, because I think, you come out of the pandemic and you think, I want to go back to normal, and I do, but normal was what was also destroying the world. And I don't think we've quite grappled with or sort of solved that problem. And I believe that technology is probably quite a big part of the answer to that problem. So I think that's exciting. So actually, they all worry me and they all excite me at the same time.
Yeah, no, but completely agree. So let's finish on this one then, James. What person, book, or story have you been inspired by?
I think my choice is a book called Man's Search for Meaning by a guy called Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, we had a little window of opportunity to get abroad in 2020, which we were really lucky, and we went to Turkey for a week, and I read it by the pool, which is a strange book to read when there's all people holidaying around you, because it's some really awful bits of it, but it's an incredible story. It was recommended to me by a guest on this podcast called Ryan Prince. And I read it, and it was brilliant. But yeah, sorry, it's more about your experience with it, though.
Not at all. No, it's lovely to hear other people have read it. I mean, I had a problem about 15 years ago. I had a real problem with chronic pain, and I was in a bit of a mess actually, and I ended up going to California to see a psychologist and a physiotherapist actually. And this is a whole podcast in itself about their whole thinking and philosophy around pain and pain management. And it was one of the books he recommended to me, so that's why I read it. And the power, the concept, I suppose, of if you can find purpose and meaning, and the amount of suffering that someone can put up with, in that context, I've always found really useful. Nothing, of course, never been through anything like what Viktor Frankl went through, but actually it does help in a work context, because I think it means that if you're going through a difficult change or transitional period with people, which you often are in growing businesses, if you can paint that meaning for them, I think it's much easier and a much more comfortable ride for people to then put up with some of the short-term sort of slings and arrows. So that's my book. I think in terms of person and story, this is now my more corporate answer. I'm really impressed with Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft. I was lucky enough to see him speak in a small group and actually have a small lunch meeting with him a few years ago in Toronto. And I think he just seems like a very genuine, authentic, person, which is appealing. But also, I was trying to think of leaders like the sort of Netflixes and etc. of the world have done incredible things, but they were already sort of quite modern businesses. They didn't have the 40 years of history, And if I try and pick a leader, who of all the leaders in the world has taken a real long-standing, massive institution, and through their philosophy, through their communication style, and actually through their knowledge as well, has turned that tanker into something new and something different. Now, of course, that journey is not finished in the case of Microsoft, but it's a hell of a change from a decade ago. So I think from a business point of view, I'm really interested in him. I think probably because actually that's the situation most of my clients are in. They're not. They actually, we talk a lot about Netflix and Uber and all that kind of stuff, but that's not actually what they're grappling with. What they're grappling with is taking a thing that's been around for 200 years and trying to turn it into a more modern organization. So those analogies with the more modern businesses are helpful and you can learn from them, but they're not actually a perfect match, I don't think, in terms of most people's real experience.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. I've never really looked into to the current CEO too much, but I've heard good things about him. Funnily enough, we've actually got the one of the top people in Microsoft on this show next month, Didem Un Artez. She was the ex-managing director of Accenture for data and AI. For the ex-European managing director, she's just moved to Microsoft. When I approached her, she was working for Accenture, but she's since moved to Microsoft. So, I'm really looking forward to that one. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah,
one,
it'll be
folks.
interesting.
And just in case the listeners didn't know as well, the book that James mentioned, Man's Search for Meaning, was actually written by Viktor Frankl, who spent 4 years or 3 years, I think, in Auschwitz. So hence why, just to give people some context, I don't think we.
Sorry, I should have said that.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it is a real eye opener, and it's quite a quick read as well. It's
very quick. You can read it in one sitting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
James, I've really enjoyed this, and I really mean that. It's been a really good conversation. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and I hope to speak to you in the future.
Well, as you know, when the restrictions lift, as we were discussing before, lots of our brilliant software engineers are based down in South Wales. So I'm missing Swansea, I'm missing Morgans, I'm missing Wyn Street, and I'm missing Cardiff as well. So I can't wait to get back on a train and get back down there, basically, to see everyone.
Absolutely. We will have to meet up then for sure. But thanks for coming on, James. If you enjoyed and took value from the show, then don't forget to subscribe, and also feel free to leave a review. We would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening.